So a lot of you have are giving up some time, and hopefully it's going to be worthwhile. And so I don't think you guys need too much of an introduction to these guys, but for the sake of an intro, Christopher Lockhart is the story editor of WME, and he has literally read over about 4 years ago, Chris. I think it was over 60,000 scripts. So I don't know what you're sitting at now. Do you count?
I stopped counting. It's just too depressing.
And Chris represents many people in WME looking for scripts for the likes of Denzel Washington, Richard Gere, all kinds of people. And then Joey is the CEO of Roadmap Writers, and he is a stalwart in getting representation for screenwriters. It's just incredible. I don't think there is another person on the planet who has helped screenwriters get representation like you have, Joey. What are we sitting on now? Almost 400, or have you hit the 400?
Well, not yet. 392. By the way, this is such a full circle moment because I told Chris when I saw him last month in person that I've been so intimidated by Chris Lockhart for many years, and I'm still intimidated, but now I'm getting more familiar with my feelings towards intimidation. So I'm very excited to be here.
No, well, I'm really privileged to have both of you guys here. So,
and we have both been to South Africa.
We have both been to South Africa. Thanks, Steve.
At different times, but yeah.
Also, just because somebody already mentioned it, I promise I'm not going to try to get anybody to adopt a dog. But if you live in Los Angeles and you want to adopt a dog, email me, please.
I was going to say, I think you've helped like a lot more dogs get homes than you have screenwriters.
Yeah, a lot more. So, but we're excited to be here.
Cool. So let's get into some questions. So Joey, I thought I'd start with you. I know that you work with a lot of writers and you help them perfect their pitches. And I thought maybe I'll start with this question because you actually suggested this theme, and I wanted to know, like, what is it about the pitching that you feel is so important?
Yeah, well, I feel like, there's so many classes and programs that teach the pitch, like how to format the pitch and, what kind of things to put in the pitch. But I do think it's just as important to be able to connect with the exec before and after the pitch. And I always talk about the story that years ago I was working with this writer named Frank Ponce, and I set him up at a meeting with Atlas Entertainment that did like Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman. And he connected so well with the exec before the pitch that when the exec said, okay, pitch me your story, and Frank did, the exec said, that's not right for us, but what else do you have? Frank pitched this other idea. He didn't even have the rights to it. It was an Evel Knievel biopic. And the exec loved it. They worked together. They got the rights. They wrote the script. Universal bought it. McG was attached to direct it. And USA was going to make it into a miniseries. And the start date was March 12th, 2020, which is the day LA closed down for COVID. But I tell that story because if Frank wasn't able to engage with the exec before, after the pitch, the exec would have been like, okay, great, thank you so much. Bye. But the exec wanted him to stay in the room, and then that happened. So I just think it's really important to know what to do before and after the pitch as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the thing is, I know that you have heard many pitches, and Chris, you have heard a lot of pitches, but both from very different points of view. So, Joey, your goal is to connect managers with writers, writers with managers, and Chris, you want to find scripts. So Chris, maybe tell us about like your sort of process with pitching. I know you listened to a lot in the Inside Pitch, but how does it go in the industry?
Yeah, so it's different, obviously, what I'm doing here than what Roadmap does. And I think, generally speaking, I think one of the biggest differences is that when people come to pitch here, they're not coming to pitch a screenplay that they've already written. Typically, they're pitching ideas, and and when you're sort of outside of going into studios, because people are when writers go into studios, they are not pitching screenplays that they've already written, because if they're in the room, the execs have already read those screenplays. That's how they got in the room to begin with. So there tends to be a little bit of a different approach in that. So, for example, on the Inside Pitch, which is my Facebook group, or roadmaps, writers are pitching to execs, and they're often pitching scripts that they've already written in an effort to get somebody to read the script. And so I think that tends to be the biggest difference. That doesn't mean that if there are people in my office that are pitching ideas that they won't say, oh, wait, like I wrote a screenplay 9 years ago, and then they pitch it. But primarily they're pitching ideas rather than completed work.
And so Chris, you always advocate for log lines, okay? So are these people who come, these writers that come to pitch to you, are they already like in the system, or are they potentially people that you picked up from queries or something like that?
Well, this isn't a free clinic, so it's not like you can just walk in off the street and pitch. But for the most part, the majority of the people who come into the office are people that are pretty well established, because I'm working with established people. I'm working with Denzel. I'm working with Rachel McAdams. I'm working with Nicolas Cage, Bill Skarsgård. So I'm working with people that are very, very well established, and they're often looking to work with people who are established. If you look at Denzel's filmography, look at the directors that he's worked with. He hasn't worked with a first-time director in an incredibly long time. He's worked with Spike Lee. He's working with Antoine Fuqua. He worked with Senior Moment, the director of Nightcrawler, on his sophomore movie. Tony Gilroy? Yeah. I get the Gilroys confused. Maybe it's Dan Gilroy. So I'm definitely kind of playing in a sandbox with people that are pretty well established. That doesn't mean that I don't meet with the other people, but the truth is that you really can you really differentiate between what I do in my Facebook group and what I do here in my office? Because the truth is that if you're pitching to me, whether it's at the Inside Pitch or you're pitching to me in my office, you're pitching to me.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's good to know, because it's interesting. It's good to know because we want to know what hat you've got on. You know what I mean? So it is to you as Chris.
Look, I'm in my office on a Saturday morning. The hat never comes off. That's the truth. The hat doesn't come off. So
later you're going to have to tell us a few things behind you there. But in the
meantime, a little tour.
Joey, so from your perspective, okay, so you listen to so many pitches. I want to ask, what are you listening for? Like, if you've got a pitch that is given to you, what is it that is the biggest thing that you're looking for, and also what is the biggest surprise of a pitch that you've ever experienced? Like, we all know there's a formula, right? And the formulas are amazing. Oh, and for everyone on this call, Joey has actually kindly provided one, and I will attach it at the end, just for the people who are attending live. So what is the biggest surprise that you have experienced in a pitch that's kind of
Yeah.
taken to another level?
Well, I'll say this before I even answer that, and I promise I'm not going to just suck up to Chris this whole time. But when I saw Chris, this is just like testament of how well he constructs stories. When I saw Chris at his office a month ago, I was telling him what I do with animal rescue, and he literally created a script idea off of just what I do in like 5 seconds. Like, hey, it starts with this, and the break into act two is this. I was like, oh my god, that's actually genius. So I just thought that was really interesting. But yeah, so what I look for in scripts, so what I do at Roadmap, if you don't know who I am, so like we train writers, we have execs come in and train writers, but what I'm always looking for are writers that I feel can be set up with meetings with execs, get their stuff to execs, to reps. Like Eve just said earlier, we just had our 392nd writer sign. So what I'm looking for is like the whole package. I'm looking for writers who have a portfolio. I'm looking for writers, and I think this is the most important thing, with something interesting to say. So start going back to like how you start your pitch, a little anecdote about what influenced you to write this. Why are you the perfect person to write this story, without actually saying I'm the perfect person to write this story because of X, Y, Z, but a little bit about you as a human self and how that influences your writing and your personal logline. So for me, that's sometimes even more interesting than the actual pitch, because the chances of you pitching your script to somebody and then being like, yes, I want to make it immediately is beyond slim. So it's about building relationships. It's about exactly being like, wow, that's so interesting. We don't have room in our slate right now, or the industry is going through a weird time, so we're not necessarily looking right now. But we'd love to consider you for other things, or especially for reps. I set up a meeting with a writer after I read a script. I sent it to a management company that I'm obsessed with, and they read it. They wanted to meet him, and they set a Zoom up, and with full intent of signing him. And in the meeting, and after the meeting, the manager called me up and said, we're not going to sign this writer because we weren't able to lean into him. We weren't able to really know, he wasn't able to articulate what makes him different than everybody else. What's his perspective into writing? Even though the writer knew that, but he got, I think, maybe just a little nervous or whatever, and wasn't able to articulate it. But to me, that's what I'm looking for in pitches, a unique lens into why the story is familiar, but what's your stamp on it? What's your perspective into it? So that's what I'm always looking for as well. And also, too, I know we'll talk about this later, just normal, lovely, charismatic people, and not robots. Like just people that are like, have hobbies outside of writing, people that are well-rounded. To me, that's what I'm always looking for.
So
Well,
that
it's a
Yeah.
job interview. I'm sorry, it's a job interview in many ways, and so that's the way you need to approach it. And I have read scripts and I'm like, wow, this script is amazing, and then I bring in the writer and it's the fucking Unabomber, and I'm like, like I can't present this guy to anybody here. I'd be like run out of the business because for the exact reasons that Joey said, it's like, you're going to be, as a writer, you're going to be working with a team of people. And if you're not communicative, or you're just, an oddball, or you're just somebody who maybe doesn't get along with people, it's like, they're going to say, there's like a trillion other writers out there. Why do we have to wrestle with this guy?
Absolutely, so true. And okay, no, everybody, don't cancel me when I say this, but I'm just gonna say it. It's Saturday. I haven't had my coffee fully yet, so I'm just gonna be a little bit more maybe filterless than usual. But that's why I don't understand so much the ideology of people on social media being like, I just got a 4 on the blacklist. Fuck the blacklist, and this is. I'm like, how is that helping your cause? If I was an exec doing some research about you, I would be like, this person seems a little angry. Like, what if I like give notes on this writer's script? Are they going to like publicly blast me on social media? So it is really about like, to Chris's point, there's so many writers out there. So if they think that you're going to be a problem, they'll just go to the next.
Absolutely. And
So let's
if I
flip
may,
that on
Eve,
its
I'm
head.
sorry, but
Yeah.
somebody just dropped the word introvert. I saw that float up on the
Lauren.
screen, and so look, clearly writing tends to be an introverted art form anyway, but being an introvert doesn't mean that you have to be a wallflower or that you can't communicate. So I'm not asking anybody to come in here and like dance on a pole for me. I'm asking you to come in and be able to talk about story and appear passionate and appear educated. Um, so I'm not saying that one has to be an extrovert, but so let's use the word passion instead, because I think that's a good word.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see from people. I I want to see passion. I want to see that people are that other people will be able to look up to the writer, because really that's like you're bringing in a writer many times to be a problem solver,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, let's say that we're having issues with the script maybe, and because like Joey said, so many of these pitch meetings, they're not about you selling your script. That's really not what they're about at all. They're really about you meeting people in the business, forging relationships, and what that executive is hoping is that maybe sometime in the future, you're going to be able to help them out somehow, some way. Maybe with a script, or maybe with their own script. Maybe you're going to come in and do a rewrite on something. That's really what it's about. So you need to think less about selling your script and more about selling yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, exactly. So if we just flip that on its head, right? So say you get Joe, you brought up like the amazing script, and you thought they were going to get signed, and anyway, that didn't work out. What if you have a mediocre script, but an off the charts personality, and you know that they're going to connect with the manager? Um, how do you face that kind of dilemma? Because I'm sure it happens quite a lot.
I think for me, it's like the definition of mediocre. Is it that the writing is mediocre, or is that this particular script is mediocre? If the writing is mediocre, then it doesn't matter if they can pitch in 94 languages. The script, they're just not at the level yet to be going in front of reps. But if it's mediocre because I didn't feel like, and by the way, when I say I'm definitely the lowest person on the totem pole, so don't take my word as gospel. But when I say like, when I hear feedback from execs, it's like maybe it's just not their voice. Maybe they're writing something because they thought they want to write a horror script because that'll help them get their script made faster, or they're writing something that's so outside of themselves because they think that's what people are looking for. And then I'll be okay. The script doesn't feel like the one to lead with. Well, what else do you have? And then if they have like 6 things, I'm sure there's maybe a couple of things. Well, maybe not, I'm not sure, but like hopefully there's 2 things in there that I'm like, oh, you should definitely lead with this one. This is so your voice. This is definitely you. So it's really a definition of mediocre. If the script writing ability is mediocre, then unfortunately at that point there's nothing I could do, no matter how good they are in a room. But if they are just mediocre in terms of finding their voice, but when they do find their voice, they could write something about mediocre, then that's different. But a mediocre script just is really nothing you could do with a mediocre script.
So, I mean, so from your perspective, there's a chance, like somebody writes something, and there is a chance that their personality can also kind of edge them a little bit forward, depending. I mean, that it's
Yeah, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna compare this to RuPaul's Drag Race because I love RuPaul's Drag Race. In RuPaul's Drag Race, there's a competition, and then there's a challenge, and there's a runway. So the challenge is the script, the runway is the pitch. You could have a good challenge, and if your runway is amazing, then you might be on the top for that week. If your challenge is mediocre, and your runway is also mediocre, you're not going to be on the top that week. But the pitch could help make the executive want to like keep you around a little longer, or maybe like ask you more questions. But honestly, it's like if the script isn't good, or if your script is even mediocre, especially now where the industry is so like constricting and there's just so few opportunities for so many writers, that it really does start with the script more than anything. You have to have a solid script. You have to have something that is bold, off from center, something a little different, something just that embodies your voice and what you bring to the table as a human.
In the old days, you could have a mediocre script. You could have a script that had this amazing concept, but the execution was mediocre. But the studio might, you know, they might buy it for $750,000 and just bring another writer onto it. They don't do that stuff anymore. There's no more development. They're really looking at scripts that are much, much farther along. In the old days, studios, they would buy, you know, 50, 60 screenplays a year, each studio. And then they would develop them all and hope that maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 of those became movies. They don't do that anymore.
So Chris, is that a lot then, or
that was a lot better. Well, look, I mean, like if you go back to the earliest days, like back in the studio system, like the 1930s, each studio turned out 200 movies a year. Now Hollywood hardly turns out that many movies a year in total. So just through time, the output of films has gotten smaller and smaller. But now where we're at, there's no more development. In fact, the amount of spec scripts that sell a year are minimal compared to how many scripts sold 10 years ago. A friend of mine just sent me an email the other day and said, hey, could you give me a list of spec scripts that sold this year? And I stopped to think about it, and I was like, I'm not even sure what script sold, because the truth is that when you read in Deadline that this script sold, sometimes it isn't even a sell, it's an option. But they just use the word sell just to try to hype things up. I had to reach out to my friend Ramesh, who always seems to know all of this information. And, and like, I'm working at the largest talent agency in the world, and I'm reaching out to Ramesh. Hey, what script sold in the last year? And he sent me, I don't know, a list of maybe about 12 or 13. That's hardly a lot of screenplays. And again, I still say that some of those were probably options, meaning that, nobody's getting a whole lot of money on them. They're not really sales.
Well, I sincerely hope that some of them were, from a great pitch, because else it's just really sad. But, we all live in hope. It's why we get out of bed every day, because there's always that slim chance. So maybe let's talk about some specifics. The obvious things to do before a pitch is prepare, okay? But what would you say would be an outstanding thing that's happened, maybe that you've observed in a pitch that becomes apparent, that maybe other writers potentially haven't done before a pitch? Is there anything?
You go first, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say that to be honest, I've not really broken this down, so like I couldn't teach some kind of pitch, like a system or something like that. I just know when I'm in the presence of a good storyteller. That's all, because I'm sitting back and they're telling their story in a way that's clear and concise and engaging, and I'm formulating all kinds of questions, and I can be annoying sometimes and interrupt a pitch and say, well, how come they're doing that, or what's this about? And they'll be able to answer those questions and then just get right back on track. I think for me the most important thing about a pitch is that it needs to be a two-way street. To me, the best pitches that I've ever experienced are conversations, as opposed to a lecture. I think that we are a little bit sort of in a place now, especially in these forums, even like the forums that I might do sometimes, or like at Roadmap, where you kind of stand up and you present yourself to somebody and you talk straight for 6 minutes, and then somebody gives you feedback. Like in my world, that's not really the way my pitches work, because I'll be fast asleep in like 3 minutes, unless the person is amazingly charismatic. For me, that I'm engaged in the pitch when I'm asking you questions. Or I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Does the character do this? And they'll say, no, the character does that. And I'm, well, I don't know if that is, I don't know if that's as interesting as that. And then, a conversation brews from there. To me, that is where I find myself most engaged, where a pitch becomes a conversation rather than a lecture.
I mean, that is obviously the goal for most writers, is to be able to have the opportunity to have that open discussion. And I love the simplicity of it. You said it, like, it's just in the storytelling. Um, but then, Joey, when you listen to a lot of pitches, there's a massive time constraint, and a writer needs to capture that story and the audience in a very short space of time. So, and I guess it's completely the opposite. It has to be fairly formulaic, because else you're not going to hit all the key points. What is your kind of, the benefit of maybe having, because there's two sides. What's the benefit of maybe having it succinct and formulaic?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We do a couple of things. One is on, like, in the more formulaic side, is like, especially people that are nervous, or maybe like maybe newer to pitching, or I mean, just anybody. I'm sure a lot of people get nervous pitching, but it's having that structure to ground them when they're pitching. So in case they can't just pitch off the cuff and they can't pitch conversationally, they can fall back on the structure to really know, like, okay, when's to break into Act Two? When am I going to inject? Like, if it's a horror film, what's the scariest moment of Act Two, to really like have somebody lean into them. So I think at those points the structures are really good. I also feel like, in terms of like how to capture a person's attention, knowing that when you're pitching to an exec, even if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock, whatever, they might have heard already 10 pitches that day. They've read 3 scripts, or they've heard 30 different stories. So by the time you're pitching, their mind is already like flooded with all these stories. That your job as a writer is to be able to make your intro, your introduction, so visceral, so interesting, that they forget about the previous person. That they're like, wait, what did you go through? Or wait, what is your connection to the story? That's really interesting. So they're not thinking about the previous person. It's all eyes on you. We also started doing something recently at Roadmap, where anybody who got signed through our programs, we invite them to all these free Zoom roundtables with execs, producers, showrunners, just to get them like more of like a competitive edge, because it's so hard out there. And so what we do there is have an intro about themselves, about who they are, what their brand is, what they bring to the table, and then just a log line of their project, and then they ask a question. So that's more conversational, because it's not so much formulaic, and I think both sides have proven successful. But nothing beats a strong intro, in my opinion, because if you don't capture their attention from the beginning, they're not going to be paying attention fully. They're going to be thinking about, okay, what can I talk about after the pitch, because I'm not interested. I'm thinking about the previous person. I've lost focus. They're halfway through the pitch. I'm not even listening anymore, and now I'm completely not connected to their story. So that visceral opening is everything.
Yeah, because I think a lot of writers sometimes maybe want to save the best till last. That just definitely sounds like put that up front.
Yeah. Sometimes in these formulaic pitches, they'll often start with the writer talking about their connection to the material, what their inspiration was. Now that can be hard if you're writing like Transformers, but you can still find some way to make it personal, even if you have to make it up. By the way, I'm not like this is showbiz, so sure, it's like if you've written a drama, and well, this was really inspired by the 9 years of caregiving my grandmother who died 2 years ago. That there's an obvious connection there. And it's an emotional connection, which is the best kind of connection that you can offer. Like I would say, if your script dealt in that realm and you were never a caregiver, lie.
You're not the first, but Joey, I remember listening to a webinar that you did with, I can't remember his first name, Peppers. Nick Peppers. Brothers.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And he said the exact same thing. He's like, just lie, just make up the story that of how you connected. And
You're fucking storytellers. Don't
To
create
me-
a story if you have to.
that gives me the heebie-jeebies. Like, what happens if you get caught out and
You
then
get caught. They'll do their research. They'll do reference checks. Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess it depends.
Yeah, that will never happen. First of all, remember that 99.9999999% of all pitches, die right there. And you need to do whatever you can do to step things up. Look, I wouldn't, if you've written a script about the president, I wouldn't say, well, I was the 5th president of the United States. You obviously want to be judicious in your line. But again, this is show business. So, do what you need to do to capture your audience.
okay, cool.
I also just want to say this too, because Meg Laveau, who's going to the screenwriting safari, mentioned this too when we were there, and I thought it was so clear that just because you have a connection to the story doesn't mean that this is a memoir. Doesn't mean that the story is a small coming of age story. It can be set against the backdrop of something big, and I think especially nowadays, people really aren't looking for like the indie small dramas, the self-reflective, like the all that stuff. So your connection to the story doesn't necessarily have to be like, this is my life. But it could be like, this is a big story, but the universal theme is about a guy trying to save his family from, whatever. And this is why I connect with that. So it doesn't have to be against the backdrop of something small. And in fact, sometimes it's more interesting when it's against the backdrop of something big, because you're like, okay, so maybe I don't get all the explosions and stuff, but like, this is what we're following. This is like the heart of the story, which I think is always compelling.
Yeah, and remember that there's always a little bit of the writer in whatever it is that they're writing. So I could say, well, this story was inspired by my divorce. My wife and I spent 9 years together, and then sadly the relationship ended. I really wanted to try to rekindle it, but she had moved on. And so my screenplay maybe is a little bit of a fantasy, and it's called Die Hard.
Well, you certainly get someone's attention, I guess.
So there you go. So it's not that hard. I just saw that Suzanne said, "Don't lie about cancer." Yeah, again, you want to pick your lies very carefully, and you are embellishing. Look, everybody embellishes when they tell stories. They might embellish a little bit just to make things a little more exciting. I just mean like you're at a party and you're telling a story to your friends, and you might embellish it. But at any rate, yeah, I think just kind of starting that formulated pitch off with sort of what inspired you to write it, and it should be something that's personal and hopefully emotional, even if you've written Die Hard.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, Jane Grisanti, who's obviously going to be a mentor at Screenwriter Safari, that's what she bleats on about all the time. She tells us to do it. And I mean, I know it's a very
She tells you to do what?
To speak your emotional truth. You don't need to like tell the exact story, but to speak.
Well, why are you writing screenplays? It's like I read a screenplay because I want to be moved emotionally. This is art, right? To me, art is not an intellectual exercise. To me, art is an emotional exercise. You are ultimately trying to move people. That doesn't mean that it can't be smart and that it can't be intellectual and that you cannot also appeal to that. But for me, when I'm looking at a screenplay, I'm looking at, first and foremost, what is the emotional appeal to this? Because that's art.
No, for sure. I mean, let's
one quick thing. In terms of, it was going back to introverts. A few people were talking about introverts. I just want to quickly say that last year I read a script, and it was honestly one of the best scripts I've ever read. It was so amazing. I was crying, I was laughing, I was furious. I was inspired. I mean, every emotion. And it was really just two people in the script, two characters, like very, very few supporting characters in like one or two locations. And when I talked to the writer, he was very soft-spoken. He wasn't like, hey, here's my script and this is why I wrote it. But it connected to like his sophistication. Like he was able to so clearly and eloquently explain why he wrote it. So to Chris's point, you don't have to be dancing and doing cartwheels when you're talking about yourself. Sometimes that's a way for the exec to be like, okay, this person might be a little cuckoo. So don't worry if you're an introvert. Like, come in and just know who you are.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I believe is. I mean, I've got a script that I love, and I was apparently an ancestor of this particular person, and that's how I pitched it, and that's how so many people fell in love with it. Then I went to Ireland, did some research, and realized not the case. And everyone, because I wanted to be honest, I told everyone, and nobody wanted to listen to the truth. They liked the other story. So, that's how it rolls. But there was a question here that I wanted to talk about. Christine actually asked it about portfolios, and maybe just to talk about that. Joey, so you obviously deal with managers, and I assume, or you must tell me if that's not true, that they have particular genres that they are looking for. And if you have a writer that maybe that they would connect with that person as a person, but not necessarily have a script in that genre, how would you deal with that? Would you kind of stick to the brief, or would you try and connect them?
I probably wouldn't, because it'd probably be a waste of everybody's time. And because if they're like looking for comedies and somebody's so talented and as a person, as a writer, and they just write horrors, I don't know why I would introduce them to that person. Though nowadays I feel like mandates are changing so fast that a year ago everybody was looking for TV, and now a lot of managers that were reaching out to me looking for TV are being like, actually TV is too hard right now, we're looking for features. So I think things are changing, and sometimes, I think most managers are a little bit eclectic. It's not, it happens, of course, but it's rare that an exec's like, a manager's like, I just want comedy writers, because they can only have so many comedy writers in their roster. But sometimes they have so many comedy writers, so they're not looking for another comedy writer, looking for whatever, a different genre. So I probably wouldn't connect them if they're not specifically looking for that genre. Yeah, but knowing what execs are looking for is, to me, very important, because obviously I want to find them the right things. And sometimes I've seen it where a rep might not think they're looking for something, but then they read the script and it's so compelling and the writer is so interesting that they decide to take the person on because this person convinced them. And I do think sometimes you don't know what you want until it's in front of you at times, because somebody can influence somebody to change their mind depending on how amazing their script is. But going back to the portfolio, something that I've seen too many times is where a writer, and anytime I go to like a writer event, nearly every question they get is, how do I get a manager? How do I get a manager? And when I ask them, I go, well, tell me about your portfolio. I would say like 6 times out of 10, they're like, well, I have one script, I'm working on a second one, or I have a bunch of ideas, I haven't written a script yet. And it's like, well, this is a non-starter conversation, because you need at least like 3 scripts to get a manager or an agent's attention. So with the portfolio, in my opinion, everybody has different opinions, is that I would suggest writers to write a couple of scripts in the same genre or subgenre. So it doesn't have to be the same kind of comedy, but maybe one's like a regular comedy, the other one's a horror comedy, because a manager does want to see consistency. So if I send them a comedy script and they like it and they want to read something else, and then I send them Saw, they're gonna be like, oh wow, this is so different than what I'm looking for. And the reason why I chose to read the script is because I'm looking for this type of writer, and now this is now they're diluting their brand a little bit. So I'm a believer that stay in your lane at the beginning, especially now because it's so hard. Be known for one thing, so when that assignment comes up, it's undeniable that you're the person that should get that. But yeah, definitely have about 3 things in your portfolio and a bunch of ideas before approaching reps.
Well, Hannah, I hope that answered your question as well. So, Chris, from your perspective, do you in the industry, is there a general kind of trend that kind of goes towards specific genres, or would certain companies look at a strategy for genres, or is it purely about trying to find scripts for talent?
Well, if you're talking about a production company, certain production companies tend to perhaps make certain kinds of movies, right? So, like Blumhouse, for example, makes a very specific kind of film within a certain kind of budget. Um, and so, if you're sending them some kind of period rom com, it's probably not a good use of your time. Uh, Agencies are different because agencies are just they're looking for anything that they can sell, anything that they can sell, and the really good agencies like the one that I work at, it isn't even really just about um, looking for things that they can sell. It's about creating opportunities. So I think a lot of people don't really understand what good agents do. That everybody's thinking about the agent that is like chomping on a cigar. I'm gonna make you a star, kid. But really good reps are doing more than just trying to sell your work. They are if they have the means at their disposal, like we do at WME, they are creating opportunities. They are literally in-house brainstorming potential ideas for clients. So, you're at home and you're writing a screenplay, and your agent is thinking perhaps even outside of the box for you. Um, and That's really where I think a lot of the surprise in careers comes in. So I think that when you are looking for a rep, I, I think first of all, people are so excited to get a rep, and okay, so like you get a rep, something. It doesn't always mean that much. I'm sure that you know even Joey can speak to that. It's okay, great. So you have a rep. Most of the time, I know being a little bit of a downer, but most of the time it's kind of like having a new significant other. It's really exciting and wonderful, and then 3, 4, 5 months later, you've broken up and you're moving on. Um, Very, very few people stay with the same rep for their entire career. Um, and so I think people tend to jump at the first rep that's interested. You're like the wallflower at the prom, and the very first person who asks you to dance, you're up on your feet. And maybe at the prom, that's okay, but that's not always the wisest way to go. I think that a lot of writers feel, well, gee, like I haven't gotten very many offers, and this person is interested. But there's a lot to consider when you're going to sign with a rep.
Yeah.
A lot to consider. And I also think it's important to remember that you're the boss, that the rep works for you. It's not the other way around. And I think that so many writers go into that relationship in almost a subservient way. Like, oh, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for signing me. And that's not the way it really is. I can tell you that when you get to where I'm at and you're working with the clients that are at my level, that's not the way they operate. No way, no way in hell are they operating that way. So that doesn't mean that you should ever be a dick, but it's a relationship. It's a relationship, and just like if you're looking for a significant other, and you go on that first date and you're sniffing each other's butts, if I can use an analogy that is familiar to Joey. Not that Joey sniffs butts, but just that it's a canine. It is a canine reference. And although I don't really know what Joey does, but just in regards to his canines. So that's really how it should be with a rep. and you want to know, like, how are they going to represent you? What is their plan for you? If they have other writers on their roster that are similar to you, how will they differentiate you? I mean, there's 1,000 questions that you could ask, but writers aren't thinking that. They're just like, oh boy, I can't wait, until I can post on X that I have a manager. And the truth is that for people like me, I'm unimpressed because I know what it means because I've been in this business for 35 years. So I can really look back on things. I know what that means. It doesn't mean anything unless you have the right manager. And so it's really about taking your time and making sure that you click and knowing what that manager is going to do for you, and that it is a partnership. That ultimately they don't make money until you make money.
I mean, that's awesome because you two are from kind of different perspectives. But Joey, I don't want to put you on the spot, and you wouldn't have these numbers at your fingertips. But just from a gut feel, out of everybody that you have assisted in getting, you and Roadmap have assisted getting representation, what percentage would you roughly say do the writers and the managers stick together in reality?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, sometimes it's like so Jess Carson, for example, she was one of the first writers we got signed or helped get signed. We introduced her to Echo Lake, and that was 7 years ago, and she's still with that manager, and he got her first staffing job on The Flash. She's been staffed for 3 or 4 seasons on The Flash. And sometimes it lasts a month. Sometimes they're like, okay, this actually isn't the right fit. And for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the writer goes in on kind of expectations that aren't realistic. Or sometimes the manager ends up leaving the industry, or sometimes it's just not a good fit. But I think to Chris's point is that one thing that I get a lot of when people are looking for managers is to say, okay, I just want to write. So I want to find a manager so I could just write. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, well, the manager is not going to be the one. I'll do all the work for you in terms of like setting up meetings and getting you assignments, and you just sit in your house and write. That's certainly not the way it works. So that's why we started doing these free networking Zooms, because getting signed is great. I mean, specifically when you have a manager that really works for you, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. You always have to be creating opportunities. You always have to be meeting people and networking, because writing is just one piece of the puzzle. So I definitely agree. Like, you have to do your research. You have to ask the right questions. This is what I want as a writer. How can you help me achieve that? These are the type of companies I want to get in front of. Do you have connections to those companies? But I'll say this too. Some of our biggest success stories, like one of our writers, we introduced him to a manager a year ago. 4 months later, he set up his project at Chernin, and it just got set up on Netflix. And it was through his manager. And it was a period piece, by the way. So you would say like, oh wow, period pieces don't sell, but there is an example. But it's really about finding the right manager for you and being able to ask those questions. And doing your due diligence, ask around. But no, this is what I was going to say, is that some of our biggest success stories are from writers who are repped by more of the boutique companies, the boutique management companies, because those managers usually are hungrier. Those managers have something to prove. Those managers are sometimes paycheck to paycheck, so they really have to have their clients work, especially for up-and-coming writers. So we definitely if it's a manager that's just a one-person manager or more of a boutique company, don't just throw them off because it's not 3 Arts or it's not whatever. Because I will say some of our biggest success stories is from that. I also want to just call somebody out really quickly in a good way. I just want to say Sandy Kelleher is here, and she recently adopted a dog from us that was trapped in a U-Haul in a cage. And Sandy, I love you so much. I just saw your name. I just wanted to say that. And now the dog is living his best life poolside. So Sandy, I just want to say you're amazing. But yeah, sorry.
No, that's
Let me
cool.
jump on something that Joseph just said, which I think is really, really, really important. And that is that when you get your rep, you don't kick back. You don't say, okay, I don't need to network anymore because my rep is going to do all of that for me. In fact, I would say it's the complete antithesis. I would say now you have to kick it up even into a higher gear, because now you actually have an intermediary. Now you actually have somebody. And so you need to be out there doing that legwork, finding those opportunities that then you can take to your manager. And then that manager will be able to figure out how to exploit that opportunity that you brought to them. That is so important, because I just think that one reason why a lot of these relationships don't work is because the writer just assumes that the manager is going to do all the work. This is a business about relationships. You have to be networking. And I know that that might be a little bit tough if you're living in like Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and you're not in Los Angeles. But there are ways now to connect. You can connect with people in the business on X, on Facebook, like in my group, or on Roadmap Writers, or in the Screenwriting Safari group, or going on the Screenwriting Safari. Whatever that is, whatever fits your schedule or your budget, there are a million ways for you to be meeting people in this business and meeting like-minded people in this business. Form a writing group, create an online writing group. It doesn't cost any money, and you can do that. And the truth is that when you're with like-minded people, you can now share your connections. You can watch one person, grow and maybe help you. Maybe not necessarily pull you along, but like if you're looking for a particular script to read, that person's in the business, they might have access to that. Or maybe they can introduce you to the manager. But if you're trying to do this all by yourself, forget it. I don't care how good your stuff is. Forget it.
And I want to piggyback too. Is like one of the best pieces of advice when I first came out here. Because when I first came out here, I was like, I have to befriend Kevin Cobain. I have to befriend Ryan Lord. Like those are like the top of the top. And I'm like, I want to like befriend those people. But it's really like, and somebody said, okay, stop that. And also like your goal, what you should be doing is making relationships and connections with people on your level, people that you're growing with, because those people are going to be in the trenches with you. Those people, once they succeed a little bit, those are the people that could actually help you, because their connections are more attainable than the top of the food chain. So I think making a writers group is a really good idea.
Yeah. So it's 5 to 8. We're probably going to go a bit over, but there's a question here that I just wanted to talk about, and I know it's a hot topic in the industry. It's from Yunona. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. What do you find more appealing in the script, an original and promising idea, or the one that is already proved to sell? IP, people, tell us the truth. What is going on?
Well, let me just quickly say, I see people wanting to join a writers group, and I think that's great, but I will say we're not responsible for any weirdness that happens in a writers group that starts here. We're not vetting all these people. So do it at your own risk. If you don't know them, ask them questions. But Chris, proven or...
IP.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what this is about. Like, when people listen to pitches at this moment in time, are they kind of prefaced and they're like looking for previous, stuff that's proven, or new stuff?
Let me just say this again. I could say this over and over again. Nobody really wants to hear it. Like, I get it, but I'm going to say it over again anyway, which is this. Forget about trying to sell your script, all right? What you are trying to do is when you're pitching, you are trying to let somebody know that you're a good writer, that you know what you're talking about, that you're confident. Then when they read your script, they'll say, wow, this is a great script. And they'll want to work with you. And maybe that will mean that they will try to package you into some other project, that they will find IP for you to write. This is what good management does. So the idea that your spec script isn't based on IP, it doesn't really matter. I think that like the majority of the scripts that sold in the last year, that I don't think any of them were based on IP. So so like it's if you're selling a spec script, you probably don't have IP. I mean, oh sure, maybe it's like a book of poetry that your aunt wrote. But it's not like you have the IP to a John Grisham novel that like anybody's going to care about. So this whole idea of IP is like, sure, great. Like if it's IP that was like a bestseller or something that everybody on the planet knows, then that's valuable IP. But if it's like, well, I wrote a novel in my intro to writing class back in 1984. So I based my screenplay on that. So that's my IP. No, that's not IP. That's PU. Nobody cares about that.
Oh, okay. Eve, if you don't take a clip of that and make that the excerpt for this, that's it. That's the excerpt.
Okay, I will, Dan.
That's amazing. It's not IP, it's PU. That's genius. And also, yes, oh my God, I'm obsessed. With that. And also, IP doesn't necessarily mean like tried and true. Like there's interesting IP out there that's so different and unique that like it could be that. I mean, I will say that like it wouldn't hurt a writer to have a piece of IP in their portfolio. And IP, and to Chris's point too about Anne's poetry, it also doesn't mean like, okay, I'm going to write a script about Cleopatra because it's IP or it's familiar. It's like, yes, there's been a million stories about Cleopatra. So it is about being able to decide like what's interesting IP, what haven't we heard before, what are some of the stories that are true in maybe a more contemporary backdrop because period is hard to sell. That could be interesting. But yes, getting a book that nobody's heard of doesn't mean that you have IP. So many times writers will say, I wrote this script and now I'm going to write a book version because I want to make IP off of it and make an IP. It's like just because you wrote the book doesn't mean that's IP. It's like you have to make sure there's a fan base. You have to make sure that, I mean, obviously get it published, make a fan base. There's so much more to it than just like, okay, I wrote a book, now I have IP. It's like that's not what IP is.
100%.
Right.
So there's one question here that I actually Will Kaiser, he asked. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but he's asking like, what is kind of the weight with shorts? If you write a short, does it carry any weight? Basically, sorry if I've messed it up, Will, but I think it's a good.
I would say no.
Shorts are, yeah. What? No,
that's the short answer to shorts. The short answer to shorts is no. Short films are really, really a medium for the filmmaker. So if you're going to direct it, it's a different story. But there's no true business for screenwriters who write shorts. So there isn't going to be a manager or an agent who's going to have any interest in that. Now, if you write a short and a rep sees that short and says, wow, that was well written, they might say, what feature length screenplays do you have? I would like to read those. So again, anything can serve as entree. That's for sure. In fact, there was just something in Deadline last week about a short that was that kind of led to the discovery of the filmmaker and stuff.
Oh, but yeah, was it Darren Aronofsky? Was that it?
I think he bought it, right? So I think he's going to produce it or direct it. So it wasn't his short. I mean, because if it was his short, that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of my little spiel here. Because he's Darren Aronofsky. So, but yeah, look, shorts are phenomenal for lots of reasons, right? Especially if you're going to produce them. And so the learning curve on that is tremendous. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't write shorts, but don't think that a rep is going to be excited because you've written a short. Ultimately, it's features that sell. It's features where people make money. So shorts can serve perhaps some kind of purpose to position you in a particular place where people will ask to read your features. In a sense, it could be like a pitch.
You know what, Joey, I saw a Twitter post actually. This just came to me when Chris mentioned it, that you watched a short recently and you were like, you got to watch this. Whatever it was, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, some short got your attention, right?
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Okay, it's called 98 Honda. It is or Honda 98. Oh no, I'm never gonna find it. But I think it's called 98 Honda. It is so good, and I'm obsessed with it. Oh, I wish I could.
What makes it good, Joey?
I will
makes
tell
it
you
good?
immediately. So there was one of our writers. Well, okay. Well, let me actually be a little more like general about it. So there was this screening at CAA, and it was promoting Black filmmakers, and there was 6 or 7 shorts, and they were all good. But this one short called Honda 98 was so funny, so interesting. There was a theme to it, but it wasn't heavy-handed. It was so well done. The actor was so good in it. And when it was over, I was mad. I was like, wait, I want to keep watching it because I could see the movie in it. It could go on for an hour and a half. Like it didn't feel like it needed to be a short. It was so well done and so funny that I was so engaged with the character that I was so drawn to the character and rooted for the character and was so intrigued by the character that when it was over, I felt like I was saying goodbye to a friend, and I just wanted to keep that friend around. So it was so good. But I will say, like, yeah, for a short script, unless you want to direct to, I can't. I'm not getting calls from reps being like, I'm looking for a short script to consider signing somebody. But maybe that could be in your portfolio for a short film if you want to direct. Then absolutely. One thing I'm seeing more and more of, or kind of the success of, are short stories. I think that's kind of an interesting market. I mean, Verve is like just selling short story after short story, and I feel like the big agencies are like really like. I think that's not uncharted territory, but maybe like how podcasts were huge a few years ago. I do think short stories are kind of having its moment now. But if you definitely should watch 98 Honda. If you could get your hands on it, it's so good.
Cool. I just wanted to bring a bit of different perspective because, as a consumer watching something, you loved it. But in the business, not carrying a lot of weight.
Let me just jump in, although I forgot what I was going to say. But it was going to change everybody's lives. That's why it was based on.
You already do with IPPU.
All right. Well, damn it. But it was going to be.